All right, so we're running a mobile cleaning business. I've got a booking right here where I've got a customer, the slots, and the specific time of the day that they want to get their cleaning done. All I have to do as a business owner, just jump in, request shifts, and the system will instantly, based on my existing roster for that day, will instantly match a worker for that job. There you go. It's just giving me some updates as to what's being found right now, and there you go, randomly assigning a worker, and Mary Doe is going to get this job. So yeah, how's it going, everybody? This is Alex, and today yet again we've got another Airtable automation demo. This time we're simulating a business that does mobile cleaning, and yeah, essentially the target here is that we want to be able to create a booking system where we can just, get a booking in and get the system to allocate the correct person from the correct shift that still has got time to work. So essentially saving the admin a lot of time with dealing with, who's available on what day, at what time, blah, blah, blah. So yeah, in our typical fashion, we're going to go through the design of the database. We're going to discuss how everything's pieced together on that front. Then we're going to take a look at how automations are being put together and what sort of steps we need to take in make.com to make this whole thing happen. So yeah, without further ado, let's get started. All right, let's begin with the database. So I'm just going to put myself down here. We have about 5 tables that are comprised of washers or workers, really, then clients, zones, shifts, and bookings. Let's take a look at each one on their own, and I'll make some comments on what the role is for each one of these tables. So first of all, with washers, we have our list of workers, basically, where I'm linking them to their zones, because not every worker can work on every single geographical zone. And I've just created about 3 zones: Zone A, Zone B, Zone C. They are all stored in this zones table. Super simple. Yeah, nothing really to comment on that. Not much to comment. So yeah, then we have the zones being split into like a concat field. That's all I'm doing there. This is used later on in the automation side of things. Next, we have our status, just to indicate whether this worker is inactive or active. Their average review, which is right now manual. There's nothing else to kind of like say about this, but this could be dynamic. Let's say based on each one of their work orders, we could, aggregate an average review. Then we have their shifts that they've been allocated against, and we're going to go into that in a sec. Their email and their user image. We've talked about zones. Let's go into clients. So clients, again, super simple. Just like the foreign key should be named name, but whatever. It's just a concat of the customer name. Over here, we have a primary key, which is called record ID. Then we have a zone, zone A, zone B. And then finally, we have the bookings that go against that client. And I've just added 2 dummy clients in there. Let's talk about shifts. So this is where things are starting to get more interesting. We have I've created like 2 views. We have a working view, which essentially is a view designed to be shared with the admin. This is where the admin will probably spend a lot of his time. And we also have a no filter view, which I've just removed all the filters, but I've kept the grouping so that it's easier to manage. So yeah, let's go through this. First of all, we have our leftmost field, which is kind of like our label for that record, where we concatenate the washer, a space, pipe space, and then I'm just formatting the dates a little bit, separating them by a dash so that they kind of look like this. It's just easier to see John Smith on that date from this time to that time. It's just a nice thing to know. Then essentially we have a linked field for the washers, or like our workers. Then we have a record ID, which is the record ID of this particular record. Then we have the washer name. Again, we use that later on in the automations. We have a lookup called review from washer, which is just the average review from the washer. Then we have the review in a value. Again, this is just a little bit easier to handle because, as I've said in some previous videos, the review, this type of lookup, basically, Airtable treats this as an array, and I don't want it to be treated as an array. I want it to be treated as a value. Therefore, I have to sanitize it and just first concatenate it and then extract the value out of that so that I just have a pure rating there. Next, I have the zones from washer, which is linked to the washer, and then just the extraction of zones. And then I'm sanitizing this yet again because I want it to be a pure string and not a array, which lookup fields typically tend to be in the API payload that comes later in the automation side, which we're going to discuss in a sec. Then we have a shift type, just a simple drop down where we have morning, afternoon, late afternoon, and night as choices. Very important that these choices are there and like typed accurately without any trailing spaces and such. Next, we have a date. So this is just a pure date field without a time. Then I'm formatting that date into a slightly different format. I believe I'm using this later on for some kind of automation, but that's there for a reason for sure. Next, we have our formulated start date time and start date time, and then formulated end time, and then end time. So these are quite important fields because they give us the range of hours that this particular shift and worker are going to be taking place for. Let's take a look at formulated start time. So essentially this is it looks like a scary formula, but it isn't. All I'm really doing is I'm using a switch. I'm then saying switch type. So if the shift type is morning, then give me the date from my date today, or the date that I've put in here in the cell, and then 7 a.m. And it just basically creates the marriage of the date and 7 a.m. So it creates a date time field. Same thing for afternoon. So afternoons will start at 12 noon, late afternoon will start at 4, and nights will start at 7. So that's one in terms of range. That's the beginning of the day, and the same thing needs to happen in the end. So I basically copy pasted it and just changed the other extreme, the end of the shift basically. So mornings will finish at 11:30, 3:30, and so forth. Now I've also included a start time, right, and an end time. But as you can see, they are exactly the same. The reason why we need it is because I need a pliable start and end time. Yes, some people might want to choose to work in the morning, but maybe an admin wants to change their time for that one shift for them to start at 6:30 or something like that, or maybe change it to 7:30. Maybe they were a little bit late. Maybe they can't work that day from 7. Essentially, I need to be able to have a baseline start, end for a shift and time for a shift. Also have the ability to manipulate it to whatever I need it. So that's why I have the formulated version, which then through an automation, which we're going to talk about in a few seconds, prints this in here, and then the admin can manipulate it as he needs to. Yeah, so that's that. Next we have bookings, times booked. This is just a roll-up of all the unique slot time assigned from bookings. We're going to talk about that in a sec. Then we have times booked, which basically takes this and again creates a unique string out of this. Then we have available times, which is a string that gets populated from the automation that runs in make, essentially telling us that, look, for this shift, this is what's available in terms of times. Then we have total booked hours, which comes again as a roll-up from bookings, hours required, and just sums up the amount of total hours booked for that shift. So that could be, 0.5 or 1 or 2 or 3. This is basically counting how much time you've booked for that person to work that day. Then we have shift hours, which basically calculates how much time, what's the duration of the shift. So here, because we've played around with it a little bit and we've set this to 9 a.m. instead of 7, it's much less than the other 3 shifts that are assigned. And remaining shift hours is basically calculating, I forgot to show this. So this shift hours is basically made up of an if the start time is blank, then leave it blank. Alternatively, just calculate the date time difference between the end date time and the start end time in minutes and define this by 60 so that we can get a decimal number to show up on shift hours. And don't forget to always format this as decimal so that you can actually see that. And then we have remaining shift hours, which basically takes shift hours minus total booked hours and just gives us how much is available for that particular person. Finally, let's jump into bookings. Again, we have a working view for admin, and then we have a no filter view, which basically has a lot of extra fields. Tom, let's go through them. So first of all, we have name. Again, this is just taking the name, space, the slot, and then the date. And this is the formula that I've used for that. If the date is blank, we'll leave it blank. Alternatively, we're just concatenating all of this data in one string. Next, we have a link to the customers, link to clients. So in this case, it's Alex. Then we have location. Well, actually, that's not the location. That's his name, but never mind. Next, we have zones. Again, so the zone comes from the client. We are sanitizing this and just creating a pure string because, again, this is a lookup, and we know lookups are arrays, and we don't want that. We just want it to be a nice, clean string when the zone from that client is living in this booking. Next, we have a single select, which matches our shifts. Again, should be exactly the same. Morning, afternoon, late afternoon, and night. This is basically the client selecting a slot. Yes, I want a morning slot. The admin should then kind of tell them, okay, look, in the morning, we've got a 8 a.m. slot time available, and you can then jump in here and choose 8 a.m. Then we have hours required. So hours required essentially is just a hard-coded 0.5. This can be dynamic later on in a subsequent version of this system, where we can technically take this and make this dependent on the type of job. But right now, it's only really, I'm just considering this like a half an hour job for each clean. It can be dynamic so that it can consume more time from each individual person's shift. But right now, it's just going in increments of 0.5. Then we have a date. So this is the date of the booking. And again, I'm formatting this in a specific way, I think again for a automation later on. Then we have request shifts, which triggers processing of the data and making sure that make automation kicks in. Request status, this is here just as a long text, which basically prints and tells the admin what's happening with the system. There's a lot of moving parts. You want the admin to have the utmost amount of information at his fingertips so that he can let the client know what the case is. Like maybe there's not enough people in that zone. Maybe there's not enough people with time available. So we need to have, the admin has to have an eye on the ground of what's going on. We'll see that in a second. Then we have the marriage of a worker and shift against this particular booking, which is basically the marriage of this record or records or one of them or two of them to a particular booking. And the system does that automatically at random. Then we're getting the name from that link, the washer name again from that link. The washer shift gets populated automatically from the automation and make. The available slots, again, this is going to be populated through make. Internal available slots, again through make. And the booking record ID is just a simple record ID function that brings the record ID of this particular booking. So yeah, that's it in terms of the breakdown of the database. Let's take a look at what's happening in automations, which is really the gist of this whole project, I feel. First and foremost, we're going to take a look at what automations are taking place and what triggers are set up in Airtable itself. So I'm just going to put myself, I think I'll put myself right there. So first of all, shift type change, update, date, time. This is an automation that runs on the shifts table that essentially, once there is a change of shift type or date, it will update that record with the start date time and end time of that record with the formulated start time and time of that record. Let me show you. So if I go into here and into shifts, and if I change, let's say is this to go in, let's change George Davis to go in the morning, you'll see how the automation will now run and update the start time here. There you go. Now that is hard-coded, and the admin can go ahead and make changes to that shift if he needs to. The other two automations are very, very similar. They are basically the same thing. So first of all, we have client choose shift, pick random washer. So this essentially runs whenever there is a slot time signed in our bookings. In other words, when there is a slot time in the booking. And this is, I'm just going to go into the working view, and this is this field over here. So as soon as somebody picks a time, I want 8:30, that is when this automation kicks in, provided that the request shifts tick box is ticked. Then it simply triggers the one automation that we have here. And yes, this looks very scary, but we're going to dissect it. And this is not scary at all if you understand how this works in make. So yeah, it basically triggers this one automation that rolls them all. So yeah, that runs the script that triggers this over here. And the other automation, again, with this part of the script is exactly the same, by the way, just, FYI. So it's this code. And then we have the variable called record_ID. And then we have the value over here, which is record ID. And yeah, basically they are identical, with the only difference that here, when we're initially requesting the shifts for the first time, is just, we're just requesting the shifts because, the client just said, hey, I want somebody to come in the morning. What do you got? Yeah, we're just requesting the shifts at that point because we don't know who we're going to book. We just want to see if something's available. So yeah, here again, the script is exactly the same. Let's take a look at what's happening with the big make automation. Okay, so let's take a look at this automation. It's one of the biggest ones that we've done, I think. But as soon as you understand what's going on, it's much easier than what you might think. So essentially, it's broken down into two major parts. These parts are the following, as you can see from my screen. So the first part is this one that I'm highlighting here, which deals with the viability of actually finding a shift. And we are constantly at that point helping admin understand that, hey, we're basically giving messages to the admin saying, hey, there is a shift, we found one, there's available time slots and so forth. So, but while we're doing that, we're not just randomly giving messages to the admin, we're doing a little bit more than that. We are also collecting and also compiling the correct shifts that are available that match what we want to build. Now, the second part of this whole automation, again, looks complicated, but it actually serves like a couple of basic purposes. The second part is this part, where we are essentially, and even that is broken down into about 3 parts. This is the first part, along with this one, and in this case, what we're doing in this part, we are simply creating a list of times when we as a company are available. 7 a.m., 7:30, 8:30, we've got available time slots. So that's that part. All of this just simply serves the creation of this particular, or the data in this particular slot, in this particular field. Then the second part is this one over here, which essentially serves as the aggregation of time slots, but including the names. So basically this one. So it's 7:30 and John Smith, Mary Poppins, Daniel, and the rest of the guys are available. Now, final part, the third part of the second leg is this one over here, which only kicks in when we have a very specific case where the time slot assigned exists, and that is this little field. So if that exists, then the system will try to go through down this route, which essentially all it does, all this particular leg deals with, is the allocation of a random worker shift from that particular time slot that is available. And again, just random is the most important thing to note here. It's a random shift. So yeah, let's dive into more detail on how I've built this. And yeah, let's do that. Okay, so let's deep dive into how we've built this particular part of the automation. In this case, we have our trigger that comes from Airtable in our most typical fashion. As soon as that trigger comes in, we just take the record ID from the trigger and fetch the booking. I actually should have renamed that. Fetch booking. And finally, we then update that same booking with like a status of saying starting matching process. Yep, that's that. Then we search for workers on the booking, and we do that by searching the shifts table. Review descending. I mean, right now all the workers have the same review in the database, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, where are we? Yeah, basically they all have the same review, and we're just making sure that we find specific workers that are available for that specific date of the booking. And I'm just limiting this to about 10 people. You don't have to limit it when you're doing this, but I've just limited it for now. Then we have the zone, because not only do I need people who are available on that day, but I also need to make sure that they are in that zone, they support that geographic location. Next, I'm aggregating the arrays that come up from these shifts. Nothing else. That's it. Next, we have our first split. So we have our first split in this sequence of about 4, I believe, where we are either updating a successful status to the admin on the booking, so over here, or we are typically posting like a failed message. So yeah, let's go through this path for now. I mean, this is just very typical. You can post whatever you want to that booking to say, hey, no shift found in required zones, for instance. Or the successful message can be shifts found in required zones, which is great. Moving on. Next, we are again playing with the array of IDs that we got from number 5. We are fetching those shifts, and then we are comparing the remaining shift hours to the hours required from 11 over here. And then again, we are just compiling, aggregating the IDs. Again, another short fail or success. And again, one thing that I've kind of missed to mention is that I'm doing this based on the imtag length. So in other words, the length of the array that I'm actually finding. So if there are more than 0 IDs in this array, then great, then it moves on. If there are 0 imtag length text operators equals to 0, then I just post a failed message. Great. And yeah, yet another successful message here, found available hours. And then again, we're doing the same thing where I am taking the array from number 14, fetching that shift, and then comparing something else. And this time it's shift type versus the slot. So then again, I'm just collecting all the IDs, posting a fail or a success. This particular fail is a little bit more complicated because I'm actually posting, in this case, the shifts with available hours found in required zones, but only for specific times. And the way that I'm doing it is that I'm getting that array, I am then finding the shifts, and then I'm compiling all the shift types in a simple text, and then I'm just posting that text and the fail message over here. The success part is typical, very, very similar as always. I'm just posting a success saying, hey, shifts with available hours found in a required zone for a required slot, which could be like, oh, I believe it's morning or something like that. I think that's how it comes up. And just check one of the logs. Yeah, shifts with available found for slot morning. Perfect. And then one final round of iterating through our array, fetching that shift, and then comparing, well, the reviews. We want to make sure that people have good enough review and a good enough review score. Yeah, I'm just basically aggregating those array IDs for one last time. Now, at this point, again, I'm posting a success or a failure because maybe, yes, you found all the perfect people, but their reviews suck. So there's no point in moving forward. But in the case that everything's okay, we are just basically then moving forward with the rest of the process. And the rest of the process, as I've already described, deals with the creation of lists of available time slots and the allocation of a random worker shift. So let's take a look at that. Okay, so now let's take a look at this final part of the automation. We're going to focus for now on this particular area over here from there to there, which is basically dealing with the generation of this particular list of hours. So let's dive in. First of all, we iterate through our final perfect list of shifts, or shift IDs rather, which is this one over here, module number 30. We're getting that shift, and then we're aggregating the IDs and times booked without the space in between them. Next, we have iterator. So we're iterating through that array again, number 30, getting that shift, and then we're comparing the slot from the original booking, which is number 3, somewhere over there, and the shift type from 62 from here. Then we are splitting. So we're doing a switch and split of times of day. So what am I doing here? I'm using a switch. It looks complicated, but it's really not. Let me break this down for you. So if the slot, the way that switch works, basically it compares a field with its contents, and depending on the content, you can then create more content. So in this case, my slot is morning. Then if the slot is morning, then it will split this string over here by a comma, and that split will create an array. If my result is afternoon, it will split this string and create an array, and it's splitting it by a comma. So I'm basically doing that for morning, afternoon, late afternoon, and night. Cancel out of that. And then what I'm doing is that I'm comparing the times booked from the value from 65, which is basically my switch and split. Perfect. And that basically then gives me the value of available times. Essentially, what this is in here, in shifts, there is available times, because whenever I'm looking at a shift, I want to make sure that the shift reflects the amount of globally available times. And I'm taking that and I'm actually aggregating again the available times from here. Next, this is one of the most interesting ones. So let me just show you what it looks like from a historical run that I did earlier. Here, this generates this big list because we're iterating through a bunch of shifts here, and these shifts create a bunch of duplicated availability, like here's 7, A7. So there's a lot of availability times in here. And what we need to do in order to create this very clean list of available times is to jump in and create a simple sanitization process to clean up that string. So what I'm doing here, and when I say clean up, I basically really want to remove the letters. This is fairly simple. I begin with a split of this text, split by a comma, obviously. Then I'm deduplicating it, so I'm making sure that all the text is unique. Then I'm sorting that text, and it's going to first sort it with the available letters. That's why we put the letters in there. And next, I'm converting that to a string because that is still an array at that point. So I'm converting that to a string, which ends over here. And then finally, because I've already done my manipulation, I'm ready to start replacing all the letters with an empty string. Replace empty string. The next one is replace B dot space with an empty string. The next one is replace C dot space with an empty string, and so forth. So once that is done, I then go in, iterate through. Actually, I need to first do a little bit more sanitization over here, where I'm essentially replacing A, because in some final version over here, I used to have A's, especially if you choose like a night shift. The night shift contains letters that start over again, so it's like ZA, ZB, ZC, and so forth. We need to do this final part of sanitization where I'm removing any extra A's from that already fairly heavily sanitized result, like so. Next, I'm iterating this result over here. Again, there's a few minor artifacts that I need to remove, and those are those brackets basically at the start and end of that string. Once I do that, I'm splitting that string by a comma. I'm basically taking these brackets out, and I'm splitting the string and creating an array and starting to iterate it. And once I iterate, I basically create a single text aggregator that splits each result with a new row and just adds the value, but it's all split by a new row. Therefore, it creates this nice organized string. Finally, the final part of this is that I'm updating the booking with the available slot, and I'm printing it right there. Cool. So let's take a look at now the next part, which is dealing with the generation of the internal available slots. That basically includes not just the time, but also the people, the workers who are available. Okay, so let's take a look at the final part of this automation, where we're going to be assigning a random shift to the booking. So we left off right here at the end of this particular part of the automation, and now we're just going to go take a look at this particular final link, where we are beginning with a filter. The filter here just basically says that the slot time is assigned, and that comes from the booking itself. And basically, once the client confirms that they want, yes, 8:30, then the system will run again, and it will process everything, but it will, at the end, because there is a time there, it will actually proceed with allocating somebody into that slot. So first and foremost, we get the booking, and again, kind of like begins right at the beginning. Then we are posting a status update to say that, hey, we're starting to randomly assign a worker. Then first get the slot time assigned from the booking, where we just basically do a split and get of the slot time assigned, because we want to get the, I believe, the time right out of that. Then we split the internal available slots value, which I believe is right here, internal available slots, and this is this particular part that we created earlier. So we split that by new line. That creates an array. Then we iterate through that array. There's a filter. And the filter, basically the condition, says that the value from that split contains the time from the booking, 7 or 7:30 or 8 o'clock or 8:30. And then we get the value. We just aggregate the values from there. Then we shuffle those values through a split. So we split that array. We remove the dash from here, right? And we're fetching the second part of that split, which would be, in our case, the names. So John Smith, Mary Poppins, and so forth. We're getting that from number 2. Right? Then we're splitting those results by a comma. So we're splitting the John Smith, Mary Poppins by the comma. So we're creating like arrays and splits all the time, essentially, with this process. So we're splitting that by a comma. We're shuffling that array because we're still in an array. And then we get 1. So we get 1 random value from that shuffle. Once we do that, we split the washer shifts, and then we get that record, and then we basically compare the washer name from the shift versus the one selected person that we've taken from here, which is this one. That should produce one single ID from this from shifts table. Finally, we're able to update the booking with the record ID from that array. Well, the first value from that array. So yeah, that's it in terms of the automation. Hopefully that you have found this interesting. It was one of the most difficult automations that we've done so far together. But yeah, hope to catch you in the next one. Cheers.